Asterisk, what happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars sits down for what should be a lighthearted late-night interview, only for things to spiral completely out of control? Tonight, we're breaking down the moment Jennifer Lawrence walked off Jimmy Fallon's set in the middle of a live taping, leaving the audience in stunned silence and the host scrambling to recover. This wasn't a planned bit. This wasn't for laughs. This was real tension that exploded on camera. Before we get into exactly what was said that made her storm off, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on after you hear this whole story. Trust me, you're going to have opinions. The Tonight Show stage was buzzing with the usual energy as Jennifer Lawrence walked out to thunderous applause. She waved to the crowd, that signature smile flashing as she made her way to the guest chair. Jimmy stood up, they hugged, and she settled in while the audience continued cheering. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. Jimmy kicked things off the way he always does, with that upbeat energy and a big smile. "So Jennifer, it's so good to have you back. It's been way too long. How have you been? What have you been up to?" She laughed, shifting in her seat. "I've been good, just living life, trying to stay out of trouble." That got a chuckle from the audience, and Jimmy leaned forward with that classic talk show host enthusiasm. "Trying to stay out of trouble? Okay, well, we'll see about that." He glanced at his cards. "So you've got this new movie coming out, and I have to say, the trailer looks incredible. Without spoiling anything, can you tell us a little bit about your character?" Jennifer nodded, settling into what seemed like standard interview territory. "Yeah, so I play this woman who's basically at a crossroads in her life, and she has to make some really difficult choices about who she is and what she wants. It's pretty intense. Definitely one of the more challenging roles I've taken on." Jimmy was nodding along, smiling. "That sounds amazing. And I know you're known for really diving deep into your characters. Did you do anything special to prepare for this role?" There was a slight pause, and Jennifer's smile seemed to tighten just a fraction. "I mean, yeah, I did a lot of research, talked to people, really tried to understand where she's coming from. It was a process. A process. I love it." Jimmy was still in full host mode, energetic and engaged. "Now, I have to ask, because people are always curious about this. How do you balance taking on these really intense dramatic roles with, still being yourself, still having fun, still being the Jennifer Lawrence that everyone loves?" And there it was. Something shifted in her expression, subtle but noticeable. She tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean by that?" Jimmy didn't seem to pick up on the change in her tone. He just kept going with that same cheerful energy. Like you're known for being so down to earth and funny and relatable. And then you do these really serious, heavy films. How do you switch between those two sides?" Jennifer's smile had definitely faded now. She looked at him for a moment before responding. "I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you asking how I do my job?" The audience let out a few nervous laughs, unsure if this was banter or something else. Jimmy laughed too, but there was a hint of uncertainty in it now. No, I just mean like you have this public persona that's very fun and lighthearted, and then you take on these dramatic roles. I'm just curious about that balance." She sat back in her chair, and her voice had lost its warmth. "My public persona. Okay, so you're saying there's a difference between who I really am and the roles I play." Jimmy was starting to look a little uncomfortable, but he tried to laugh it off. "Well, I mean, isn't there? Like, you're not actually the characters you play, right?" "Obviously I'm not actually the characters I play, Jimmy. That's called acting." Her tone was sharp now, and the audience had gone quiet. "But I'm also not putting on a persona when I do interviews. I'm just being myself." Right, of course." Jimmy was clearly trying to steer things back to safer ground. "I didn't mean it like that. I just think people are fascinated by how actors prepare for roles, especially someone like you who's so talented." "Someone like me." Jennifer repeated his words slowly. "What does that mean? Someone like me?" You could feel the tension building now. Jimmy shifted in his seat, and his smile was looking more forced. "Just, someone who's been in the industry for a while, who's done a lot of different types of films, someone who people really connect with." She stared at him for a long moment. "Is this about my age? Are you trying to ask me about my age right now?" "What? No." Jimmy looked genuinely alarmed. "No, I wasn't. I was just talking about your career, your experience." "My experience?" She nodded slowly, but her expression said she wasn't buying it. It's interesting, because I've been doing this for a long time, and I've sat through a lot of interviews, and there's always this thing that happens. This weird thing where people act like they're complimenting you, but they're actually doing something else entirely." The audience was completely silent now. This wasn't playful banter anymore. This was something else. Jimmy tried to interject. "Jennifer, I really wasn't trying to do anything. I was just asking about your process." She held up a hand, cutting him off. "No, let me finish, because I think this is important. You asked me how I balance being myself with playing characters, as if those are two separate things that don't connect. And then you brought up my quote-unquote public persona, as if I'm performing all the time. And now you're talking about my experience in the industry, which, let's be honest, is usually code for something else." Jimmy was visibly uncomfortable now. I promise you, that's not what I meant. I have so much respect for you and your work. Do you though? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you're trying to put me in a box. The fun, relatable girl who also happens to act sometimes. Like my work isn't serious unless I'm completely transforming into someone unrecognizable. That's not what I said. Jimmy's voice had an edge to it now, a hint of defensiveness creeping in. I was literally just complimenting your range as an actress. Were you? Jennifer leaned forward. Or were you doing that thing that people do where they act surprised that I can be both a real person and a professional at the same time? Because I've been getting that my whole career. And honestly, I'm tired of it. The audience didn't know where to look. Some people were staring at their phones, others were glancing at each other uncomfortably. This was not what anyone had signed up for when they came to see a taping of The Tonight Show. Jimmy took a deep breath, clearly trying to reset. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I was trying to have a conversation about your craft, about your process. That's it. That's all I was doing. Jennifer shook her head slowly. No, you were doing what everyone does. You were trying to make sense of me by creating this narrative where I'm two different people. The real me and the actor me. And I'm telling you right now, that's not how it works. I'm one person. I'm always the same person. I never said you were two different people. Jimmy's voice was firmer now. You're putting words in my mouth. Am I? Because it really sounded like you were implying that my public image and my work are somehow at odds with each other. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jimmy glanced at his producer off stage, a quick look that said he needed help, but there was nothing anyone could do. This was happening live, in real time, and there was no easy way out. All right. Jimmy held up his hands, trying to regain control. Let's just take a step back here. Clearly something I said rubbed you the wrong way, and I apologize for that. That wasn't my intention. Can we just start over, maybe talk about something else? Jennifer crossed her arms, and her expression hardened. So now you want to move on because things got uncomfortable. That's not. I just thought maybe we could talk about something more positive. Something fun. Something fun. She let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. Right. Because God forbid we have an actual conversation about the way women in this industry get treated. Whoa. Okay. Jimmy sat up straighter, and you could see his jaw tighten. I don't think that's fair. I treat all my guests with respect. Do you? Because I've watched your show, Jimmy. I've seen how you interview men versus how you interview women. With men, you talk about their process, their vision, their artistry. With women, you talk about their dresses, their workouts, their relationships. And when you do ask about the work, it's always with this tone of surprise, like, wow, you're actually good at this. That is absolutely not true. Jimmy's face was flushed now, and his voice had lost all its playful energy. I ask everyone about their work, regardless of gender. That's ridiculous, is it? Jennifer leaned forward in her chair. So when was the last time you asked a male actor how he balances being himself with playing characters? When was the last time you questioned whether a man's public persona was authentic? Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The audience was frozen, watching this unfold like a car crash in slow motion. He finally spoke, his voice measured, but tense. I ask different questions to different people based on their careers and what they have going on. It's not about gender. Isn't it though? Jennifer wasn't backing down an inch. Because I can think of plenty of interviews you've done with male actors where you spent the entire time talking about their craft, their influences, their approach to the work. But with me, the first real question out of your mouth was about how I stay real. You wanted to know how I balance being a real person with being an actress, as if those are mutually exclusive things. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Jimmy looked out at the audience, then back at Jennifer, and you could see something shift in his expression. The friendly host persona was cracking. I really think you're misinterpreting my questions. And I think you're not hearing what I'm saying. She leaned back, her arms still crossed. I'm not misinterpreting anything. I know exactly what those questions mean because I've been asked variations of them my entire career. And I'm at a point now where I don't have to smile and pretend. Like they're not condescending. Condescending. Jimmy repeated the word slowly, and there was an edge to his voice now that hadn't been there before. You think I'm being condescending to you right now. I think you're asking me questions that you would never ask a man. And yeah, that feels condescending. You know what? Jimmy's professional mask was slipping. I've been doing this show for years. I've interviewed hundreds of people, and I've never had someone accuse me of sexism on air. Well, maybe that should tell you something. Jennifer's voice was cold. Maybe it should tell you that most people are too polite to call it out, or too worried about their careers to say anything. But I'm not worried about that anymore. The audience was dead silent. A few people had their phones out, clearly recording this disaster as it unfolded. Jimmy ran a hand through his hair, and when he spoke again, his voice was sharp. I invited you here to promote your movie. I asked you friendly questions about your work, and somehow, I'm the bad guy. You invited me here to be charming and bubbly and to tell funny stories that you can turn into viral clips. Jennifer shot back. You didn't invite me here to have a real conversation about my work. You invited me here to perform. That's what this is. Jimmy's voice rose slightly. That's what talk shows are. It's entertainment. You know that, so you admit it. Jennifer pounced on his words. You admit that you expect me to put on a show, to play a version of myself that's palatable for your audience. That's not what I said. Jimmy was getting flustered now. You're twisting everything I say. I'm not twisting anything. I'm just not playing along anymore. The tension was unbearable. Jimmy looked off stage again, and this time his expression was pleading, but there was no commercial break coming, no easy escape. He turned back to Jennifer, and his voice had gone cold. You know, I think you came here looking for a fight. I think you had this whole thing planned out. That stopped her for a second. Jennifer's eyes narrowed. Excuse me, I think you wanted to make a point. Jimmy was leaning forward now, his nice guy persona completely gone. I think you decided before you even walked out here that you were going to turn this into something it didn't need to be. Are you serious right now? Jennifer's voice was low and dangerous. You're actually going to sit there and accuse me of staging this. What else am I supposed to think? Jimmy spread his hands. I asked you normal questions. Questions I've asked a million times before, and you immediately jumped down my throat. So yeah, it kind of feels like you came here with an agenda. My agenda? Jennifer laughed, but it was a bitter sound. My agenda is to be treated like a professional. My agenda is to have a conversation about my work without being reduced to some quirky personality trait. That's my agenda. I was trying to have a conversation about your work. Jimmy's voice cracked slightly. That's literally what I was doing. No, you were trying to fit me into a narrative. Jennifer stood up now, and the audience gasped. You were trying to make me into this thing you could understand. This neat little package of girl next door who also does serious movies. And when I pushed back, when I challenged that, you got defensive. Jimmy stood up too, and now they were both on their feet, facing each other across the small space between his desk and her chair. I got defensive because you attacked me on my own show. I didn't attack you. I disagreed with you. There's a difference. You called me sexist. I said your questions were sexist. Jennifer's voice was steady, controlled. There's a difference there too. Oh, come on. Jimmy threw up his hands. You're really going to pretend there's some huge distinction there? Yes, actually, I am, because one is about a pattern of behavior in this industry, and the other is about you personally. But if you want to make it personal, fine. Let's make it personal. The air in the studio felt electric. The audience was completely transfixed, unable to look away from this train wreck. Jimmy's face was red, and he was breathing hard. You know what, Jennifer? Maybe the problem isn't the questions. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle normal interview situations anymore. That landed like a punch. Jennifer went very still, and when she spoke, her voice was ice. What did you just say to me? I said maybe you're so used to everyone treating you like you're untouchable that you can't handle regular questions anymore. Jimmy was on a roll now, all his frustration pouring out. Maybe you've gotten so caught up in your own importance that everything feels like an attack. You don't know anything about me. Jennifer's hands were clenched at her sides. You don't know what it's like to sit through interview after interview where people reduce you to the same tired stereotypes. You don't know what it's like to work your ass off and still have people question whether you're serious about your craft. And you don't know what it's like to try to do your job while someone sits there and accuses you of things you didn't do. Jimmy fired back. I was trying to be nice. I was trying to have a good time, and you turned it into this. You were trying to be nice. Jennifer repeated slowly. You think asking condescending questions is being nice. They weren't condescending. Jimmy practically shouted it. They were normal questions. To you, Jennifer's voice rose to match his. To you, they're normal, because you've never had to think about what those questions actually mean. You've never had to consider how it feels to constantly have your authenticity questioned. The studio had gone from silent to chaotic, people shifting in their seats, murmuring to each other. The band members were looking at each other with wide eyes. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of this disaster. Jimmy took a step back, running both hands through his hair. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. I'm trying to apologize. I'm trying to fix this, and you just keep going. You're not trying to fix anything. Jennifer's voice was shaking now, whether from anger or something else. You're trying to make me the problem. You're trying to make it seem like I'm overreacting so you don't have to actually hear what I'm saying, because you are overreacting. Jimmy's composure was completely gone now. I asked you how you balance different parts of your life. That's it. That's all I did. And you turned it into this whole thing about sexism and the industry and God knows what else. You still don't get it. Jennifer shook her head, and there was something almost sad in her expression now. You really, genuinely don't understand why that question is a problem. Then explain it to me. Jimmy threw his hands up. Explain to me why asking about your process is such a terrible thing. It's not about my process, Jimmy, it's about the framing. It's about the assumption behind the question. When you ask me how I balance being relatable with doing serious work, you're implying that those things are opposites. You're implying that I can't be both at the same time. And that's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps women in this industry stuck in these narrow little boxes. I wasn't implying anything. I was making conversation. That's the whole point. Jennifer's voice cracked slightly. You don't even realize you're doing it. It's so ingrained in how people talk about women that you don't even hear how it sounds. The audience was transfixed. This had gone so far beyond uncomfortable that it had looped back around to fascinating. This was real, raw, unfiltered conflict happening right in front of them. Jimmy closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, his voice was quieter but no less tense. Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say I asked a question that came across wrong. I've apologized multiple times. What more do you want from me? I want you to actually understand why it was wrong. Jennifer's voice matched his, in volume but not in tone. She was still fired up. I don't want a performative apology. I want you to get it. I'm trying to get it, but you're not giving me a chance. You just keep attacking me. I'm not attacking you. Jennifer's frustration was boiling over. I'm trying to explain something that matters to me, and you keep making it about your feelings. Because you're on my show, Jimmy's voice rose again. You're sitting here, on my stage, calling me out in front of my audience. How am I supposed to not take that personally? Maybe that's the problem. Jennifer shot back. Maybe it's too much your show, too much your stage, too much your comfort zone. Maybe you need to be uncomfortable for once. Oh, I'm uncomfortable. Jimmy let out a harsh laugh. Trust me, I am very uncomfortable right now. Good. Jennifer didn't flinch. Maybe now you know how I feel every time I have to sit through these interviews. The silence that followed was deafening. Jimmy stared at her, and Jennifer stared right back, neither of them willing to back down. Finally, Jimmy spoke, and his voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow carried through the entire studio. I think maybe you should leave. Jennifer blinked, surprise flashing across her face for just a second. What? I think this interview is over. Jimmy's voice was steady now. Final. I don't think there's any point in continuing this. You're kicking me off your show. Jennifer's voice was incredulous. Are you serious? You said you didn't want to be here. You said this whole thing was beneath you. So yeah, I think maybe it's better if we just end this now. I never said it was beneath me. Jennifer's hands were shaking now. I said your questions were problematic. Those are two completely different things. Well, it doesn't really matter now, does it? Jimmy moved back toward his desk. Because this whole thing has been a disaster, and I think the best thing we can do is just stop. Jennifer stood there for a moment, looking at him with an expression that was hard to read. Anger, definitely, but also something else. Disappointment, maybe, or disbelief. Fine. Her voice was cold. Fine, if that's how you want to handle this. I'm not handling anything. Jimmy sat down behind his desk, and his movements were stiff, controlled. I'm just acknowledging that this isn't working. You're running away from an uncomfortable conversation. Jennifer grabbed her purse from beside the chair. That's what you're doing. Call it whatever you want. Jimmy wouldn't look at her. I'm done. Nan. Jennifer's voice was quiet now, almost sad. I can see that. The audience was completely frozen. No one was making a sound. Even the band was silent, watching this unfold with expressions of shock and discomfort. Jennifer turned toward the audience, and for a moment it looked like she might say something to them. But instead, she just shook her head slightly, almost to herself, and started walking toward the stage exit. Jennifer, wait. Jimmy's voice stopped her. She turned back, and there was something in her expression that suggested maybe, just maybe, he was about to say something that would fix this. The audience seemed to hold its collective breath. Don't forget to promote your movie on social media. His voice was flat, professional, completely devoid of emotion. Since you didn't get to do it here, the coldness of it hit like a slap. Jennifer's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, hurt, and finally something like resignation. She didn't respond. She just turned back around and kept walking. The camera followed her as she made her way off the stage, her heels clicking against the floor in the silent studio. She didn't look back. She didn't wave. She just walked straight through the curtain and disappeared. Jimmy sat at his desk, staring down at his cards. The audience didn't know what to do. A few people started clapping, hesitantly, but it died out almost immediately. It felt wrong to applaud. It felt wrong to do anything. Finally, Jimmy looked up at the camera. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. We're going to take a quick break. His voice sounded hollow. We'll be right back. But the damage was done. The interview that was supposed to be fun and promotional had turned into something else entirely. A raw, uncomfortable confrontation that neither party had walked away from looking good. The clip would be everywhere within hours. The takes would be endless. Everyone would have an opinion. But in that moment, in that studio, there was just silence. The kind of silence that comes after something breaks that you can't put back together. So there you have it. That's what happened when Jennifer Lawrence walked onto The Tonight Show and everything went wrong. Two people who couldn't hear each other, couldn't understand each other, and couldn't find a way back from the edge once they got there. Was Jimmy wrong for his questions? Was Jennifer overreacting? Was this a legitimate conversation about industry problems or a manufactured controversy? Everyone's going to have their own answer to those questions. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. Here's what I want to know from you. Do you think Jennifer was right to call out the questions, or did she take things too far? Let me know what you think, because this is one of those situations where there's no easy answer, and that's what makes it so fascinating to break down. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.